This week with the double Parsha, we complete the fourth book of the Torah, the book of Bamidbar, which, as we said at the beginning when we embarked on the book, was the actualization, the attempt of the Jewish people to actualize the teachings at Sinai. As the Jewish people moved away from Mount Sinai, went through the wilderness, and now at the conclusion of the fourth book of the Torah, they're on the cusp of entering the land of Israel. Miriam has passed away, Aaron has passed away, Moshe is told very clearly that he is to pass away before the Jewish people enter the land, but the table is set. And the topic we're going to explore today has to do with possessions, which makes sense because the thrust here is the possession of the land of Israel. And we'll start by laying down a fact, which is that each and every one of us as a Jewish person has inalienably, as we would say if we had a constitution, three possessions. We have a portion of Torah, we have a portion of the world to come, and we have a portion in the land of Israel. Those are three portions that each and every Jewish person has a claim to. You could probably forfeit your portion. I don't know. You could certainly ignore it, but it's there for the taking. It's there for the enrichment. It's there for us to achieve a sense of security and the standing that it requires, just like all possessions, the standing that it requires to live lives of meaning and purpose. And indeed, when you think about possessions, we're going to begin with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, the 5th chapter, Mishnah 10. There are four types of character, four categories of human beings. That's what the Mishnah says. Arba midot ba'adam. One says, mine is mine and yours is yours. This is a commonplace type. And some people say this is the characteristics of Sodom and Amorah, which were wiped out from existence. Pretty big spread there. Another says, mine is yours and yours is mine. This is an unlearned person, a person who has no clear differentiation. One says, mine is yours and yours is yours, such as a pious person, a chassid. One says, mine is mine and yours is mine, someone who sees it all for himself, the commonly displayed attitude anytime you walk into a preschool, any place in the world, where the word you hear children saying to one another over and over again is mine, in Hebrew, sheli. So a person who says sheli, sheli, v'shelcha sheli, it's all mine, Russia, that's a wicked person. A lot of insight here. A lot of differentiation that needs clarification. Let's just get to the heart of something here. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is yours. So what do I live off of? Does a person, does he own nothing? So the Bartanur explains very succinctly, such as a person who wants to benefit others from his possessions, but he does not seek benefit from other people's possessions. So this really does characterize a chassid. And again, the word chassid here, with all due respect to all the chassidim of the world, it's a term that goes back way before the Hasidic movement. And it really characterizes a person who is completely involved without limitation in fulfilling Hashem's will. That's the classical definition. And as the Bartanur says here, such a person goes beyond the letter of the law. After all, he is, in a certain sense, saying, as they say in California, my home is your home, and your home is your home. If I can help you with any of my possessions, with any of my gifts, with any of my wisdom or talents or thinking, I'm here to offer them to help you. Probably with some limitations, reasonable limitations. And I don't require reciprocity on your part. I'm not I scratch your back, you scratch my back person, but rather I'm a person who really has an attitude toward everything I possess, which we're going to explore tonight. But let's take a stab up front with a theory. I see what I have as deriving from God's kindness and beneficence to me. And therefore, I'm not hung up on running out. I'm not seeking to usurp something which isn't given to me by God. And I live my life with such a prevailing attitude. So, with this background in mind, we're going to approach the two Torah portions that are read this week. So let's start with the apportionment of the land, which is really discussed significantly in two particular places. And let me share the screen for a second, if I can. And please speak up if you can see what I see on my screen. Can anybody see a map? Here, if somebody would unmute yourself, yes. You see a map which lists 12 tribes. Okay, so the process of dividing up the land of Israel into 12 tribes is discussed both in Matot, the first of the parshiot we read this week, and in Masei, the second. It doesn't actually take place until the Jewish people enter the land of Israel. They conquer the bulk of it. And then Joshua, as is prescribed in the Torah reading this week, together with Elazar, the Kohen Gadol, get together and they do a lottery. And what you see here is a map. It's not from a Jewish source, but it's a colorful map. And you see basically where the 12 tribes lived. Not all of it is so clear, but from north to south of the land of Israel. What we're not so accustomed to seeing is the right-hand part of the map. And I hope we can just see that, where you see huge swaths of land in the light pink and yellow up there in the upper right-hand corner. We don't even think of this land as being part of the land of Israel. It's on the other side of the Jordan River. And that's a big topic in the first of the two parshas. But let's just talk about the process of dividing up the land altogether. How was the land divided? So it's noteworthy that the land was divided through a process of a gorol. And we have the word gorol. It's not a lottery as we think of a lottery. You don't buy a ticket. But a gorol was by casting lots. Or if there are 5 of us and a designated piece of the land of Israel is meant for us, so then we would carve it up into 5 pieces, and then we would put our names into, write them on lots, or we would put the pieces of, we would designate the 5 portions of the land on a lot. We would each pull out a gorol, a piece of paper from the lottery, so to speak, and that would determine who we have. But it was done doubly, and it's a whole topic in Jewish law. It was also confirmed by the high priest wearing the Urim V'Tumim and the letters flashing to confirm each and every designation of land. So what do you see from this? Why a double process, even beyond seemingly what the Torah prescribes? And the reason is because we all know how difficult it is for human beings to receive a piece of anything. It's a simple thing. You cut up a pie into pieces and you give a piece to each person. And if you took an honest poll, you would probably find that each person feels they got the smallest piece. And certainly, if there's anybody amongst that group that you particularly don't get along with, you'd certainly be convinced that that person has a bigger piece than you do. Such is human nature. It's so ingrained in human nature, as a matter of fact, that's why the Joshua, together with the Kohen Gadol, when it came time to apportion the land, had to be so careful and precise. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, after all, we're dealing with literally a God apportioning something which is inherently yours. We mentioned 3 possessions a person has. Person has a portion of Torah. Person has a portion in the world to come, and a person has a portion in the land of Israel. And here was very literally going to be the case. And that portion was not only for you, but it was going to carry on throughout all the generations, that even if you sold that piece of land for whatever reason, when the Yovel, when the Jubilee land year came, it went back to you. So we're talking about a permanent, inalienable division of the land that's going to continue throughout history. So relating that back to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in Parak 5, 5th chapter, the 10th Mishnah, you could see how the typical person who feels what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, not to an unreasonable extent, but to a normative extent, and isn't so happy perhaps to share what he has, finds giving tzedakah a hard thing to do, certainly at a certain level. Such a person is suspicious or comparing, or what do we talk about? Fear of missing out. All these attitudes that people have as part of human nature, they all come into play, and they all come into a play in a way that, as the Mishnah teaches us in Pirkei Avot, we need to aspire to grow as human beings. We should hopefully evaluate ourselves. If we're on the low evil level, quote unquote, of mine is mine and yours is mine, so let's at least start learning to respect other people's property and to treat other people's property more respectfully and with more care. That's probably a great starting point. And that could certainly be a wedge to grow a person into becoming a commonplace, an in-between person, a person who says, okay, I respect that what's yours is yours. I'm not coveting it. I'm not trying to swindle you. I'm certainly not going to lie and cheat to get what you have. By the same token, there are clear limitations on what I'll give. And I may, sit down and think hard, all right, did I give my 10% of tzedakah already or not? I don't want to give too much. I don't want to make a mistake and find myself on the short end of the stick or whatever. And then a person could grow from there, again, perhaps by really focusing on the extent to which God supports humankind and all the kindness that a person receives. And maybe even by training a person to understand that not all the kindness we receive from God we deserve. The attitude that Jacob put forward, that I'm diminished by all the kindness that God overwhelms me with. So such attitudes could grow a person even into the chassid level, where a person would really feel it makes me happy when someone else benefits from what I have. And it doesn't leave me in a sense that when I need something, I automatically look at what someone else has and think, oh, I really need that from that person. But rather it leaves me in a position of maybe beseeching God to give me more to meet my needs independently of other people. So such is a measure, as the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says, a measure that we can apply to ourselves in terms of our stature as human beings, and a way for us to measure our growth and progress as human beings. And this brings us to chapter 32 in Matos, in the first of the two parshiot that we read today. And it's on page 910 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. And it begins as follows. We did this 2 years ago in depth, but we had a different emphasis. This is a different class. So if you do want to go back, and I posted a link to previous classes, if you look at the class from 2 years ago, talking about the same section of the Torah, but with very different sources. It starts off like this. The children of Reuben and the children of Gad had an abundant livestock, very great. They saw the land of Yazir and the land of Gilead, and behold, the place was a place for livestock. The children of God and the children of Reuben came and said to Moshe, to Eleazar the Kohen, and to the leaders of the assembly, we want this land. We want it for ourselves. As it says in sentence 5, if we have found favor in your eyes, let this land be given to your servants as a heritage. Do not bring us across the Jordan. What we spoke about 2 years ago is how this triggered what could be rightfully called a sense of panic on the part of Moshe, that this could be a repeat of the sin of the spies, demoralizing the people. That was Moshe's concern. The people, the two tribes involved made it clear that that was not the case. And again, just to look at that map again very, very quickly, hopefully. We'll get it back on the screen here for a second. What you see in that map, in that right-hand portion, is you see that Reuben and Gad occupy these vast swaths of land on the right-hand side of the map. And interestingly, the tribe of Manasseh was split, half on one side of the Jordan, half on another side of the Jordan River. We're not going to go into those details, but in fact, this request was granted. Okay, what's the outcome of this request? The outcome is not a happy one. The outcome is that hundreds of years later, when the Jewish people had built the first temple and they were sinning, and it was time, and they were vulnerable to an attack from the enemies who came to attack the Jewish people, and this was a significant period of time even before the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. They came around the Fertile Crescent, and they vanquished these 2.5 tribes living on the other side of the Jordan, and they exiled them. And that's part of the process of the 10 lost tribes. But these 2.5 tribes were the very first to be vanquished and sent out into oblivion, to be hopefully returned to the Jewish people at the time of Mashiach. What do we make of this? So there are many midrashim, but we'll start with actually a sentence in the book of Proverbs. It's chapter 20, Pasuk Chaf Aleph 21, and Rashi here applies it to this situation. It says, an inheritance may be acquired hastily in the beginning, but its end will not be blessed. Lo tivarach. And applying that to the decision made here by these 2 tribes of Reuven and Gad, impacted half of Manasseh, but we're not going to discuss why at this time. They certainly weren't the instigators here. So what Rashi says there is that they were excited. They lost their bearings when they saw the lushness of the land, and they had all these flocks, and they said, "Oh, this is perfect for us. We're good. We're going to request properly." They didn't grab it. They didn't fight with anybody. They didn't plant a flag. They didn't do anything untoward. And in fact, as Midrashim explained, nobody was competing with them. Everybody had their eyes on crossing the Jordan and entering the land of Israel and doing battle and conquering the land and then splitting it up eventually. But because they had this certain sense of, let's see what the translation is here, haste, a certain sense of, and we're talking about very great people here, but let's use the word like impulsivity. And what happens when a person feels this way? When a person loses the ability to regulate their emotions, so all of a sudden the one thing in front of you grows larger and larger and larger and larger, and it becomes a necessity. It becomes something that, it must, manifest destiny. It must be that God intended this land for us. I don't want to characterize their thinking in a way that's not characterized by rabbis, because that's not the right way to do it. However, the Midrashim all, and the sentence in Mishlei that's referred to them, all emphasize certain aspects of one's attitude toward possessions in a very important way, which gives us a lot to think about. Let's look at one of these Midrashim. And the Midrashim, actually, it's a long Midrash. And it's, for people who are interested, it's in Bereshit Rabbah, on sentence 32:1. You could find it right there. But it says as follows, basically. It says, we should understand something. There are people in the world who merit considerable wisdom. There are people who merit strength and power. There are people who merit wealth. It says, is that a blessing for them? Yes. As long as they view their excess as being gifts from Hashem, and they derive, or they fall within the parameters of fulfillment of the Torah. It's a clear, unabashed statement from the Medrash. Medrash says, the Medrash here is telling us the key and why what happened here with these great tribes of the Jewish people, why they lost their way. And then the Medrash goes on. First of all, the Medrash compares it. It says, who are the other wealthy people who lost everything they have in terms of wealth? And it talks about Korach, who when we talked about that Torah portion, the rebellion of Korach against Moshe and Aaron, we mentioned the fact that his wealth, his extreme wealth, misled him. And it talks about Haman, who felt he was on top of the world. And as he says in the Megillah itself, in Megillat Esther, in the book of Esther, he says, I've got everything except for this one Jew, Mordecai, failing to give me the honor that's due to me. And that became his undoing. So you could see an insight into the sense that don't think there is a point where enough is enough. But the Medrash is really digging deeper than that. And the Medrash is saying that it becomes an issue of valuing what you have. And it could be wisdom, and it could be strength and power, and it could be wealth for personal privilege reasons, rather than seeing it as being a gift from God, which falls within the parameters of the Torah. And please don't misunderstand this. Clear statements in the Talmud that if a person becomes more wealthy and is rich, they can spend more money on themselves. This is not Karl Marx, where I'm not going to buy myself a second overcoat, no matter how cold the winter gets, until I know that every comrade of mine has a winter coat already. We're not talking about that type of a system, but we're talking about an attitude towards what you possess. And in fact, what it says about B'nai Gad and B'nai Reuven is chavavu et mamonam. They cherished their wealth. And their cherishing of their wealth led them to value less their connection to their fellow Jews. And these two ideas are very related in my mind, but this is what the Medrash says. What does it mean by that idea of valuing their connection? Because clearly, if the land of Israel has a corpus on the west side of the Jordan, and 10 of the tribes live there close to each other, with Jerusalem in the center, and 2 tribes live on the other side of the river, so to speak, in more separated, broad, vast lands where they could spread out. All of that speaks to a sense of not valuing to the fullest extent the interaction with others, the connection with others. And you could see that it right away smells from the litmus test of that Mishnah of leaning a person to what's mine is mine and yours is yours. I don't mind if I have to take, 2 planes and a bus to get to the temple in Jerusalem for the holidays. I'll get there. And in the meantime, I won't see you so often. And, we have this all there with Jewish families, the first ones to leave across the sea to come to America for whatever reason, the first ones to go from the East Coast to the West Coast. Oftentimes it spoke to a sense of seizing opportunity and thereby devaluing the benefit of being closely connected by being integrated amongst your fellow Jews. And that's the dynamic that we see in this week's Torah reading. It's spelled out in the whole back and forth between Moshe and the tribes. In the end, Moshe agrees with them once they promise that they will lead the Jewish people in battle. But it's also picked up on by Rashi. If you turn to page 912 in the Stone Chumash, just a few psukim later, chapter 33, sentence 17, you see them once they've already had a discussion, and the leaders say, "We will not return to our homes until the children of Israel have inherited every man his inheritance. We shall not inherit before them. We will do everything properly." But then they go on to say, they say in sentence 17, we shall arm ourselves to 16, I'm sorry. They approached Moshe and said, "Pens for the flock shall we build here for our livestock, and cities for our children." And Rashi just points out, and later on Moshe corrects them and says, no, talk about your children first before your livestock. Build safe haven for your children first. But it belies, according to Rashi, the sense of valuing possessions to a tremendous, tremendous extent. A few takeaways as we conclude the class. Critical to this whole process of growth that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot really lays out, that a person take an honest look in the mirror. You may be the wicked person who says mine is mine and yours is mine, who really has no problem, plundering other people's stuff, probably in a good, subtle, proper way. and not being very quick to part with anything of your own, but start growing in terms of a sense of connection to other people. Start growing, talking to each of us, in terms of the extent to which we see what we have, even our hard earned wealth. Even if when I get up in the morning, I'm convinced no one works as hard as I do. No one puts in as many hours. No one has as much aggravation. All the things we tell ourselves, no one knows the troubles I've seen, as the old song goes. Okay, that all that could be true, but ultimately cultivate within yourself an attitude that everything I possess, if it's in the domain of wisdom, it's in the domain of strength and power, if it's in the domain of possessions and wealth, recognize it as a gift from Hashem. And that should lead us to something very uplifting. If it really, to the extent that I understand it's a gift from Hashem, so then I understand that the more I utilize it within the confines of Torah, the more generous I am, the more I'm showing how much I appreciate what God is doing for me and I want to do for others. And certainly God is going to be quick to replenish or even supplement that which I have already. God's not running short, of anything. And to do this hand in hand with fostering connection, deepening connection to community causes, and to other people. And as one commentary, one modern person says, it's the extent to which a person feels that everything I have is entrusted to me. And indeed, if you look in Genesis, in the Sefer Bereshit, chapter 32:25, where right at the moment where Jacob is confronted by the archangel of Esav and struggles throughout the night, why was he by himself? So the Talmud says that he realized he forgot small jars, little items, and he went back across a different river to get them. And so what was he doing? He had children and servants and slaves. He had just sent millions of dollars worth of gifts ahead to placate Esav. He wasn't a cheap guy, but the Talmud says, Tzadikim chaviv aleim mamonam. Righteous people do cherish their possessions. So isn't that a contradiction to what we just said about Reuven and Gad, those two tribes losing out because of their haste and their excitement to grab the first piece of land that they came, even without seeing even firsthand what lay on the other side of the Jordan River? And the difference is, as explained by the Rosh Hashiva of Chafetz Chaim, that yes, Jacob cherished every possession he had, understanding that maybe those jars that I left on the other side of the river will be needed tomorrow to help someone else. Maybe there'll be a kindness that needs to be done. Maybe we'll need to send medicine to someone. Whatever reason, if it's something I possess as a gift of God, then I want to preserve it so that it's ready to be utilized for a good purpose. That's a healthy way to cherish your possessions. But Gad and Reuven, these two tribes, with their considerable flocks, with the excitement that they felt when they encountered this Trans-Jordan area, lush and green, they couldn't manage it. They couldn't maintain the right perspective. Their possessions took on a big place in their psyche, so much so that when they talked about planning to leave their families behind so they could go fight for the Jewish people, yeah, we'll take care of our flocks and we'll take care of our children. Moshe says, no, take care of your children and take care of your flocks. That's fine. But put your children first. Don't lose all sight of perspective. Don't be so excited. Don't, as it says, don't hastily seek to acquire an inheritance, using those words in Proverbs, that you're sure will give you a boost throughout history. And again, after all, if what you have is gifted to you for a purpose from God, and yes, part of that purpose is so that I can wear nicer clothing and that I can provide even more for my children than I'm able to do right now. But another part of it is so that I can fulfill the Torah on a higher level, that I can do more kindness, keep things in perspective. Not an easy thing to do. And I just want to make a comment here about our children. People talk about social media, and for a long time, we just assume that the challenges of social media are, well, what have my kids seen? What have they seen on the internet? Oh, my goodness. No, it's a whole change of perspective where I'm scrolling, I'm looking, oh, this excites me, oh, this grabs my attention. And you can see how it plays with the mind of a person. It makes it harder and harder for our children to sit down with a book and confront an idea. It certainly makes it harder to turn back to that first Mishnah we discussed in chapter 5, Mishnah 10 of Pirkei Avot, and to say to myself, okay, there are all these different measures of human beings. Let me take an honest look at myself. Let me think about myself. Let me think about the way I deal with my possessions in a serious way, and not to put myself down, but to determine where on this matrix I stand. And then let me figure out what ideas and attitudes I can cultivate within myself so that I can grow beyond the limitations I feel now. And so that the gifts that God gives me could be utilized ultimately to expand and build upon my portion of Torah, my portion in the land of Israel. And I don't mean the geographical size, but making it your own, and my portion in the world to come. It's a change of orientation. It requires a slowness of thinking. It requires a reflective nature, and it requires us to have goals of growth for ourselves so that we can please God with Hashem's help, not only receive the benefits that God bestows upon us, but maintain the attitudes and the posture of growing as a person so that it could really become an eternal benefit, not something that in the end has no blessing, but the opposite. Each and every item that God bestows upon us of wisdom, of strength, of wealth and possessions should become a catalyst for us to increase each one of our inalienable possessions that we have as Jews. Please God, we should aspire to this, and we should find our way forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining. Have a good evening.
You also.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.